Pay to win in Tarkov has reared its ugly head once more, and we need to talk about it. So recently on Tarkov TV, Nikita mentioned probably the most concerning suggestion that I heard him talk about in the whole thing, because 90% of it was actually really good, as you'll see from the other video that I did, where I think the future for Tarkov is very bright. But the one point that I did find very unsettling was the fact that he was going to be bringing in a 20% XP bonus for players with the Unheard edition of the game.
We are adding new stuff for different packages of the game, and EOD, Unheard Edition, Left 4 Dead Edition, and Left 4 Dead Edition. Left Behind Edition. They will add different bonuses. So if somebody with the Unheard Edition, for example, is in your team, you all within the group receive the experience bonus. So this Unheard guy will boost the whole group up. So if you have somebody on your team with Unheard, it will give you more experience.
I think that this is straight out wrong, but at the time, we didn't know exactly what the details were going to be. Since then, BSG have released this patch here, which shows the exact details of what has happened. With this patch, your active edition will increase the experience gain in Raid, Left Behind edition gets 7%, Prepare for Escape 9%, Edge of Darkness 12%, and the Unheard edition 20% XP bonus. Naturally, I'm not a big fan of this, and I ended up writing a tweet, which has probably been one of my most viewed tweets ever. I think as of the time of recording this, it's nearly got 200,000 views. So yeah, it's probably one of my best tweets, and it's kind of hit a nerve both sides on the community, with people who agree, people who disagree, and players feel very strongly about it. So I wrote that Max Traders requires 4,765,799 XP. The Unheard edition now only requires 3,971,499 XP to get there, which means that standard accounts have to earn an additional 800k XP before getting to Max Traders. And clearly I disagree with this particular change. So first things first, I just want to get ahead of any misinformation on this, because it does say in the update that this is for in-raid XP only. So presumably this isn't going to apply to quests, it's only to experience that you get in raid, which is a percentage of the experience that you get on your character overall. It presumably also doesn't interact with the arena XP either, as it flows from Tarkov Arena back into your base game. So for most players, it's probably going to end up being less than 50% of the total XP, and so the gap is more like 400,000, I would say, maybe a little bit less if you play Arena. Still impactful, but maybe not as impactful as I thought at first glance. However, one thing that did surprise me in the initial takeaways from the responses that I got to that tweet was, yes, there were a lot of people who were annoyed about it, and players who've had EOD in the past and still feel burnt by the Unheard Edition scandal a couple of years ago, but a lot of people coming in defending BSG, saying that they would pay for pay-to-win stuff if they brought it in, which I find very strange. There was a significant proportion of players, actually much more than last time when we had a scandal about Unheard, who were for these changes and thought it was good, and I just find that very strange. There's kind of two parts to it, because they also did introduce some cosmetic stuff as well, which initially, just as an EOD owner, did irk me, the fact that Unheard only can use the bear or USEC clothing on either character. But I realized after reading some of the responses that I actually don't care about this. There's not much difference between that and somebody going out to buy a switch that allows you to do it as a cosmetic thing. It's purely cosmetic, it doesn't impact with the game, so even though it irks me as an EOD owner just kind of on principle, I actually don't care, because it doesn't impact the gameplay at all, unlike the experience change. So for me, it's not about the fact that EOD is getting 8% less experience than the Unheard edition, it's about the fact that this is in the game at all, and I've spent a long time campaigning basically for standard account users to have the playing field leveled, because the game is already quite skewed. And what I find really strange about this change is that Nikita in Tarkov TV spent a lot of time talking about bringing in new players into the game and trying to ease the experience and bring quality of life stuff about quests and about simplifying things and making it easier for the average player. And then at the same time, they're making it relatively harder for these players who they're trying to bring in to level up against people who already have accounts. How many new players do you think are going to turn up and buy the $183 version on Steam of the Unheard account rather than just going and buy the base game? So I find that this is a very unusual time to be bringing in this XP change, irrespective of the fact that I just don't think it should be in the game at all anyway, because it is basically pay to win. You're going to have a bigger advantage if you have a higher account, leveling up faster, which means you're going to get to trader levels earlier, and you'll have an advantage over those people that didn't do that. So this is where you kind of get snagged up in the definitions of, well, what exactly is pay to win? And a lot of people will say, well, it's not pay to win, it's pay for convenience. And I think the problem with this is that it all depends on how you define this stuff. If you define any advantage in the game in any way as pay to win, then yes, it is pay to win. But pay for convenience is this kind of slightly more insidious way of describing things. It's basically a spectrum, right? You've got on one end of hard pay to win, where you can just outright buy levels, where you can buy gold bullets, where as the opponent you know that you're just being killed by somebody who has paid for something that you can't access in the normal game. And then you've got other things which are kind of pay to win, but in a way that you don't really notice. And this is where this pay for convenience comes in. And let's be honest, EOD has been pay to win or pay for convenience right from the word go. But I think the difference here is that by the time the game started to get really popular, the EOD and standard, left behind, the account structure was already set in place. And so when people were starting to play the game, like me, I played just before Reserve was added, but after the flea market, this was already the structure. So you turned up into Tarkov and you played and you understood that you could upgrade your account after a bit, but it was prohibitively expensive. So you normally only did that after a wipe or two of playing on standard, so you could kind of feel the real Tarkov experience, and then you paid a bunch of money to skip the progression after you knew what you were doing. And that sort of drew a line in the sand. Yes, it was pay to win, but everyone understood where they stood on that particular issue. The problem that I find here is that over time, there's a temptation to move that line. And I think that's really what I'm trying to be pushing against here, is that we already know that there's certain elements in the game that are pay for convenience or pay to win, depending on how you want to define it. And that line should stay. I don't think we should be pushing that line any further, because the further you push it, the more you undermine the overall feel of the game and you dilute exactly what it is to be Tarkov in the first place. Arena's already done quite a lot of damage in unwinding some of this, especially for the sort of standard account versus EOD debate, but things like this make it worse. Now, I'm not one to call out pay to win often. In fact, I was actually one of the big people on the counter side of the pay to win argument when some new attachments were brought in the battle pass, because everybody cried wolf on that, saying, oh, these things are pay to win or not. But you could build exactly the same builds using things that are in the game. It is a shame that you can't access all the parts from the main game within the main game without playing a second game, but that's kind of a separate conversation. That's not necessarily part of pay to win. That's more just about access and allowing people the ability to get access to all the different parts, which isn't the case because of Arena. But as I said, it doesn't necessarily make it pay to win, because you can buy something that's got identical stats within the base game and use that and have exactly the same gameplay experience as you could as somebody who had the stuff from Arena. A moment ago, I called pay for convenience insidious, and the reason for this is, imagine a hypothetical scenario where you're playing against somebody else who has exactly the same skill level as you. You can imagine that it is you for all intents and purposes, and they have unheard and you have standard. Well, you're going through the wipe, say the seasonal account, for example, that's coming up soon, and you fight. They're level 26 because they've had their 20% XP bonus. You're only level 24. This means that they have Prep All 3. They technically can get access to the Quran front plate, and you fight them with their better gear. You don't have a 50-50 survival rate anymore against them, or 50-50 chance of winning. It is lower than that. And so although you don't necessarily know that you're playing against somebody who should be level 24, but they're actually level 26, you end up losing and your survival rate is lower because of these features within the game. And the reason why it's insidious is that because of all of the factors that go into a PvP fight, and not everybody's the same skill level and people play different amounts, you can't unpick the pay to winness out of the argument. So it's impossible to know, and as a player, that's actually probably for the best in some ways, because you didn't get shot by the gold bullet and it doesn't make you angry, because all you know is that the guy had Edge of Darkness or had the Unheard Edition at the end. So it is a little bit better psychologically for pay for convenience, but it does impact your survival rate overall as a player, and I think that collectively we should be pushing back against the line being moved by introducing more of this stuff into the game like they have done for Unheard, which I still disagree should have been introduced as an addition in the first place. In my opinion, BSG should keep going with the cosmetic angle. They should be bringing in country camos, uniforms, flags, patches, voice lines for particular countries. You know, British USEC would go so hard. I would love that. I would pay for that. And I think that's the way they should go. They should bring in the weapon skins into the base game, maybe have some that are unique that you can pay for as well, because people love kitting out their guns with nice, sensible military camos. We're not talking about anything stupid here. We're not Nicki Minaj firing lasers. None of that in Tarkov. But people would love to paint their guns the way they do in real life and have some of these realistic camos from real militaries around the world, that kind of thing. Those kind of cosmetics, I think, would go really hard. And people clearly will buy them. People genuinely will be buying these things within EFT. It's just, it has to be done in the right way. And does this EXP thing change the game fundamentally? No, but it's about the principle of it. And I think that we should all stand together to go against this and try to get BSG to do this stuff in the right way, so that we can pay for things that we want to see in the game that don't affect the gameplay, but allow them to fund the studio. Because it's not like I don't want them to make any money, but I want them to do it in the right way that doesn't affect the gameplay experience negatively. So ultimately, is Tarkov more pay to win now with the changes? Yes, Was Tarkov pay to win before? Basically, yeah. But I just think that we should stop moving the goalposts on this, and that BSG needs to stop putting more pay to win stuff in the game, because every time they do, they dilute the game experience more and more. And I don't know exactly how much EFT can take, especially the players as well. If BSG want to keep goodwill with the people and to keep the game going long term, they need to make sure that people actually feel like they're on side with the studio. I feel like they atoned for their sins of the Unheard edition itself, but it just opens up old wounds, and it does hurt when you see things like this coming out of the studio, and they seem to be very unapologetic about it. So with that, a big shout out to all my patrons, and as always, have fun in your raids.